is expected to make a full recovery and return to the court in the near future. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Need an accident attorney by your side? All you got to do is call the accident guys.
Injured in a car accident or at work? Call the accident guys to speak with a real expert attorney for a free consultation.
Is this the takeover?
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
I'm a bad man.
LeBron's son, Bronny, is attending classes this week at USC. No word yet on when he'll be cleared to resume basketball activities. Bronny suffered a cardiac arrest on July 24th during a workout on the USC campus. Bronny was diagnosed with a congenital heart defect. The U.S. Open tennis tournament kicked off Monday in New York City. Coco Gauff defeated Laura Siegemund of Germany in 3 sets. Gauff will play Myra Andreeva of Russia in the second round Wednesday night. Michelle Obama was a surprise guest speaker last night when the U.S. Open celebrated 50 years of equal pay for men and women in professional tennis. Today is final cut day for the NFL's 32 teams. Each team must reach the 53-man roster limit by 1 p.m. today. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is dedicated to empowering our communities by providing progressive talk radio for our audience. We strive to be an intersectional voice for the voiceless. As a Black-owned and operated station, we are committed to highlighting diverse perspectives and creating safe spaces for meaningful dialogue. We believe that everyone has something unique to bring to these political, economic, social, and cultural conversations, and we don't shy away from the hard conversations about current events. We endeavor to be a beacon of hope and understanding, while boldly challenging listeners to think more deeply about difficult topics that impact us all. With this in mind, our mission statement at KBLA Talk 1580 is simple: to create an inclusive platform that promotes civil discourse through honest dialogue and encourages personal growth among our listeners, so they can become the active agents of change. Our vision is to establish ourselves as the premier radio network with relevant programming across the beloved community, connecting people through shared experiences and collective power for lasting impact beyond these challenging times.
Live from historic Leimert Park in Los Angeles, California, I'm Tavis Smiley, and I'm so glad to see you and me back in stride again. Before we get started with today's show, let me invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley, and get updates on X, that's formerly Twitter, at Tavis Smiley. By the way, should you miss any part of today's program or want to catch up on previous shows, you can also visit TheTavisSmileyShow.com. That's TheTavisSmileyShow.com, or wherever you get your podcast, and listen to the Tavis Smiley podcast at your leisure. Another great show on tap for you today. In our second hour, a conversation about the racially motivated murders in Jacksonville, Florida, and the broader implications for combating hate-driven violence with our regular contributor, Connie Rice. In our third hour, 2 conversations. Up first, we'll chat with former L.A. Lakers player Lamar Odom about his near-death experience, which led to the creation of the Odom Recovery Group, dedicated to substance abuse treatment and wellness programs. Lamar Odom on the top of Hour 3. On the bottom of Hour 3, the B-side, this summer we have been battling major fires everywhere, it seems, domestically and, of course, also internationally. Remember those fires in Canada? Canada that came down this way. There's an aggressive push to get more women of color into firefighting. But why? We'll talk about it with Dana Howard of the California Conservation Corps on the backside of Hour 3. But in this first hour, a conversation with Emmy-winning filmmaker, political analyst, and New York Times bestselling author Chris Whipple about his latest text, The Fight of His Life, inside Joe Biden's White House. Chris, good to have you on the program. How are you today, sir?
I'm great. Great to be with you, Tavis.
It's good to have you on. Thank you for your time. We'll talk about Biden and a few other things, of course, in this hour. Before I get into the text, let me just start with, we'll be talking in our second hour about a lot of Trump news of late, and every day there's Trump news. So we'll talk about some of that in the second hour with Connie Rice, while we also talk about these murders in Jacksonville. But let me just ask broadly how you think the president is navigating this particular and peculiar space. And what I'm referencing is we've never, of course, been in a moment like this where his chief rival, the person that we expect to be his opponent, the presumptive nominee, is in the midst of all the drama and brouhaha that surrounds him at the moment. And so we spend a lot of time talking about Trump, but how do you think Joe Biden has navigated this moment given what's happening on the other side of the aisle, as it were?
Yeah, Tavis, I think the answer to that is he's navigating it very, very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
I think Joe Biden wants to be absolutely sure that he doesn't play into the crazy conspiracy narrative of Trump and the MAGA movement that this is somehow a political prosecution, that there's a two-tier system of justice where Hunter Biden gets to take a walk and the Biden Justice Department goes after his political foes. That is not the case, and Joe Biden wants to make sure that he doesn't fuel that narrative by talking too much about it. But it's going to be a fine line for him to walk because in this campaign, he has to talk not just about the economy and all the stuff he wants to brag about.
Mm-hmm.
He's got to talk about the threat to democracy that is posed by the MAGA movement, the continuing threat.
Yeah, and that is tricky terrain. I'm glad you went there. I'll follow you. On the one hand, one could argue that, as you just did, that the way he's handling it right now is pretty spot on. He's not wading into those deep waters. One could put it this way: at the moment, he's pretty much taking a hands-off approach. On the other hand, given what you've just said, that our democracy is hanging in the balance, as it were, and given that you have to win by being aggressive in a campaign, you can't win by, again, a hands-off strategy. It puts him in a tricky situation. So what's your read of when, where, and how he needs to hit the accelerator? Because right now he might not be on the brake, but he's not really being aggressive, knowing that Trump is gaining ground every day. I mean, we'll talk about it more later in the program. You saw the same numbers I saw, Chris. This guy raised $7 million. His campaign, $7 million, right after that Georgia, when he showed up and turned himself in, the very next day, he raised $4.1 million the next 24-hour period. And now that number is well over $7 million. So, again, a hands-off approach is only going to work for so long. And I take your point, but tell me more.
That's true. But I think he'll go there eventually. And remember that think back to the November 2022 midterm elections, when everybody said that Biden was going to get blown out. History says that you lose something like 40 seats from your party in a midterm 2 years after you've been elected, and Biden defied those odds. Well, how did he do that? The way he did it was two things. He talked about women's reproductive rights, and he talked about the threat to democracy that was posed by MAGA. And, of course, in 2022, a lot of Trump wannabes, nut jobs were out running, and Biden prevailed big time. He defied the historical expectations. So you're going to hear a lot about women's reproductive rights and the threat of MAGA in the upcoming election, and so he'll go there. I have no doubt.
Yep. So my chief form of exercise is boxing. I'm a pugilist, and so I'm in the ring often with my trainer. And when we come forward, I want to talk about the way I see this rematch, as it were. For those of you who are boxing fans, you know that there are oftentimes rematches in the sport. And most times, I think it's fair to say, those rematches do not measure up. Everybody's talking now about whether or not there'll be a rematch between Errol Spence and Jamal Crawford. For what reason? I mean, Crawford jabbed him to death, if you're a fight fan. Why? would there be a rematch? And what do we think Errol Spence would do, in fact, in a rematch? Not to get too far afield for those who are not sports fans, but you take my point of the metaphor, that we're about to have presumably a rematch here, and oftentimes these rematches don't measure up. Chris's book is called The Fight of His Life, Inside Joe Biden's White House. The question is whether the fight of his life was beating Trump the first time, or the fight of his life is beating Trump the second time. We'll talk about that and a great deal more when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
For all the freedom-loving folk, this is Tavis Smiley.
I feel like freedom.
What's up, party people? It's your favorite MC's favorite rapper, MC Light here. And we're celebrating 50 years of hip-hop, authentically powered by Cadillac. And we're going to take it way back to where it started. It was only fitting that hip-hop began with teenagers at a back-to-school jam in the rec room of a South Bronx apartment complex by an 18-year-old brother. By the way, I'm also sure he had a Cadillac parked outside. He noticed the energy on the dance floor when he switched between two turntables, extending the beats, repeating the breaks, and never losing the rhythms. And that was the birth of hip-hop. And from that moment, it took off.
For more on how Cadillac is celebrating hip-hop's 50th, visit Cadillac.com/audacity.
Hi, it's Tavis Smiley. KBLA Talk 1580 is inviting you to join us on Saturday, September 16th, 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. for our very first economic empowerment event for the community. This event is free and it's powered by Caltrans. We're doing this in association with Rambo House, and here's Rambo to tell you more.
Contracts. I'm going to say it again for all of us small business owners out there. Contracts. Rambo House, KBLA, Tavis, me. Oh my God, this is going to be massive. I truly thank Caltrans for giving us the opportunity to focus on contracts. Listen, that's what it's all about to be a small business in LA. That's how we hire our own. That's how we expand our community is contracts. KBLA1580.com is for you to have a seat at our contracts-focused event. Contract Ready does it again. We had over 900 last time. So you guys know how exciting this is. And if you just think that you want to get into contracts and you're close to it, bring your friends out for September 16th at the Marriott Hotel. Listen, you know where to register. KBLA1580.com. Come see me. I can't wait to see you. Let's do it, Tavis.
So be sure to go to KBLA1580.com for all the details. We'll see you Saturday, September 16th.
Support comes from Getty, presenting The Gospel at Colonus, a theatrical event under the stars that reimagines the story of Oedipus. Blending Greek myth with Black spiritual practice, the show follows the blinded Oedipus as he seeks redemption after a lifetime of tragedy. Co-produced by Court Theater, conceived and adapted by Lee Brewer, with music composed by Bob Telson. Thursdays through Saturdays this September at the Getty Villa Museum. Tickets available now at getty.edu.
KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dominique DePrima from the show First Things First, weekday mornings from 6 to 9. Join us tomorrow with young voices from South LA. Teenagers from Mama Boo's Live Your Life Foundation speak out, plus headlines, trending topics, and your phone calls only on KBLA Talk 1580.
Smart talk for curious people just like you. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Our guest is Chris Whipple. He's the author of the book, The Fight of His Life, Inside Joe Biden's White House. He is an esteemed New York Times bestselling author, political analyst, and Emmy award-winning filmmaker. And I'm pleased to have him on this program today in this first hour to talk some politics. So, Chris, you heard me say a moment ago that rematches sometimes measure up. Oftentimes they do not. Broadly speaking, what is the fight of his life? The first time around or the second time around?
Yeah, well, at both times, I think. And I love your metaphor because rematches can be unpredictable, as we all know. I mean, did Muhammad Ali lose a few rematches? That was a while ago. But it can be unpredictable and dangerous. And I think that in this case, obviously on paper, one would think that Joe Biden would have a comfortable margin on Trump, that this would be a rerun of 2020. But, be careful what you wish for, because there are a lot of what Bill Clinton's White House chief, Mac McClarty, used to call UFOs out there, unforeseen occurrences. And you never know when one's going to rise up and bite you. You've got the age factor, like it or not. A lot of people think Joe Biden is too old to run for re-election. You've got the possibility of the economy taking a bad turn. And then there's always the prospect of a third-party candidate coming out of nowhere and tipping the election to Trump. So a lot to worry about, including the fact that Joe Biden could be a slip and fall away from flipping the whole script a la Mitch McConnell. Now, God bless him. Let's hope not.
Yeah.
But he's not getting any younger.
You've said two or three things I want to interrogate right quick. Let me start with the latter first. If Joe Biden were to have, and he's had any number of slips, as you well know, I'm talking now verbal slips. We'll get to the physical slips in a moment.
Yeah.
Any number of verbal slips. What would happen if Joe Biden had a moment caught on film like Mitch McConnell, where he just freezes or gets lost in a loop? And I wish him no ill will, but there are all kinds of conversations, of course, about his mental acuity. You went there, so I'm following you. You wrote the book. If Joe Biden were to have a moment like Mitch McConnell, what happens politically, you think? Would that be the end of? Would that be the end?
Well, let me just say, first of all, having studied him for the last 2 years and talked to his entire inner circle, the notion that the verbal slips are much ado about nothing.
Okay.
I mean, this is a guy who used to have a speech impediment. A lot of it is just, a hangover from that. Mentally, he's fine. I can tell you that. But the answer to your question is, would the GOP absolutely hang that around his neck and beat him to death with it if that were to happen? If he were to have a McConnell moment, absolutely. That would be really bad news for Biden. The good news is that he may walk like a zombie. He's got arthritis. That's just, we all know people his age who walk like that. But we also know 60-year-olds who act like old people, and we all know 85-year-olds who are full of life and firing on every cylinder. So I think aging is a very individual thing, and it's overblown in Biden's case.
You mentioned earlier that on paper was your phrase. On paper, one would think that Joe Biden could take Donald Trump out again. Well, depends on what paper you're looking at. If you're looking at paper polls, the polls indicate, everyone I've read, indicates that these guys are neck and neck, 4 indictments in and counting, and they're still neck and neck on paper vis-a-vis the polls. And you say, what about that?
Yeah, I think that poll there was a 43-43 tie.
Right.
I forget which, maybe Quinnipiac. I'm not sure now. I think that was kind of an outlier. I think the other polls have showed more of a lead for Biden pretty comfortably in the popular vote. But the trouble is that elections are not won with the popular vote.
Exactly.
We all know all too well. It's happened all too often to the Democrats. And, when you get down to those 3 key swing states, it only takes about 40,000 votes total in those states to swing the election. So that's where the real battle will be joined. And, there were no guarantees. So the Biden campaign has got to run scared. Let's hope there's no overconfidence whatsoever among those folks.
Yep. Let me pivot for a second and we'll come back. What's your personal view, to the extent you have one and want to share it, of the Electoral College? Because you're right, the popular vote ain't what it's all about. Ask Hillary Clinton. The Electoral College, what's your view of that? And I'm trying to recall, and you would know better than I, Chris, whether or not Joe Biden has ever commented, ever shared his true thoughts about the Electoral College.
Yeah, I'm not aware that Joe Biden has gone on the record wanting to do away with the Electoral College. My personal feeling is that we should get rid of it. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's an outdated relic of that favored the slave states way back when. I think it's undemocratic. I think it's long outlived its usefulness, and frankly, it's given us a skewed result all too often in recent history.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I stand.
Campaign, the Electoral College is one thing. Let me just ask you before, again, get straight away into your text, the fight of his life inside Joe Biden's White House. Let me ask you, again, the Electoral College notwithstanding, whether or not the changes in the campaign calendar, obviously on the Democratic primary side, what does that do potentially to aid and abet Joe Biden coming out the block strong?
Well, I think it's going to help Biden without any doubt. I mean, this was no coincidence that South Carolina is now at the top, and that New Hampshire has been pushed back. And you'll recall that Joe Biden was dead and buried in 2020. Nobody thought he was going to be the nominee. After Iowa, I remember talking to John Podesta, whom I got to know because I wrote a book about White House chiefs of staff, and he was one of Clinton's. I remember talking to Podesta at the time, right after Iowa, and he said he's dead. You know, there's no way Joe Biden comes through. Well, South Carolina, as we all know, saved him, and the African American vote in particular, and Jim Clyburn's endorsement changed everything, turned everything around on a dime. So I think it'll be a real advantage. Remember, he did badly. Biden did in New Hampshire. He really, jumped on a plane and got out of the state as fast as he could, and went to South Carolina, and the rest is history.
Yep. There's a great deal of talk, as you know, every day about what I would call an enthusiasm gap. That those on the right, those MAGA supporters seem to be a lot more enthused. Again, back to the $7 million Trump raised, like in basically 48 hours after he turns himself in Georgia. There is no shortage of enthusiasm on that side of the aisle. On Biden's side of the aisle, every poll, every survey, every study I've read suggests that while he may be the standard bearer, he's not really the number one choice of Democrats. Say nothing of Republicans. His own party wishes he were not the nominee at this particular point in his life. They're grateful for what he did in the first term. He saved the democracy, anybody but Trump. But this time around, there are real concerns that you and I discussed earlier. My question is obviously whether or not you think that enthusiasm gap to your earlier formation is much ado about nothing, and that if and when Trump does, in fact, become the nominee and people realize how stark the choices are, we will once again want anybody but Trump, and Joe Biden sails back into the White House.
No, I think it's much ado about something. It's much ado about a lot. It's a very real factor. You put your finger on it. It's a real concern. One of my chief concerns would be if I were running Joe Biden's campaign. And by the way, I think my book, The Fight of His Life, is pretty even-handed, warts and all look, even though it may be overall favorable to Biden. But the enthusiasm gap is real, and it's a real worry. And look, I'm old enough to remember. I was a kid, but I'm old enough to remember the last election that felt like it was as existential as this one, 1968. And I was a big Bobby Kennedy fan, and when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, nobody had any enthusiasm for poor Hubert Humphrey, who ended up as the nominee, and he lost to Nixon, as we all know. It could very well happen in 2024, and I think that people should just remember that this is, I think, the most consequential election of my lifetime, and I've been around for a while, so I hope people will get out and vote.
Is there anything that Joe Biden can do to ramp up that enthusiasm, or is he really going to have to rely on the fact that he's fortunate enough to have Donald Trump as an opponent, and people just don't want to see the second coming of Donald Trump?
I think it's going to be the latter. At this point, Joe Biden, there are no surprises left about Joe Biden.
Right.
Nobody's going to suddenly. We're not going to wake up one morning and suddenly be excited about and think that Joe Biden is a charismatic figure. He's not. But just take a look at what he's accomplished the last 4 years. I mean, 13 million jobs. Record low unemployment, record low black unemployment, bipartisan infrastructure, a CHIPS bill, a black female justice on the Supreme Court, rallying NATO against Ukraine. Nobody would have predicted that he'd be doing all of that, plus, passing bipartisan legislation in this polarized world. So, I think people need to remember that that's not bad for an 80-year-old.
I've asked this question of others, but not of one who has written a book called The Fight of His Life Inside Joe Biden's White House. I've asked it of others, but not one who spent the last couple of years talking to everybody on his team. Why is it, with all that you've laid out, and you ain't the first person to offer me that agenda, I know it well, I could quote it in my sleep, I know what he's accomplished. Why is it then that this race is still neck and neck? Why is it that he seems not to be getting the credit? Maybe it's not the message, but the messenger, and you can't do anything about the latter, can you?
Yeah, no, there's not much that Joe Biden can do about the messenger. I mean, he is who he is.
Yep.
And I think we'll see him out there on the stump. We'll see a lot more of him as the election goes on. But look, I think it's a real mystery as to why he's not getting more credit for the achievements that he's made. Part of it may be that we're just in a post-Trump world where the country is so bitterly divided and polarized. You'll never see 50% approval ratings again. That may well be true.
Mm-hmm.
We're just so polarized these days that you're just not going to see the usual bump, the bounce that previous presidents would get with that kind of record.
Let me probe that, because you said you're the first person I've ever heard say that. Certainly in recent memory, and it's worth interrogating. So I'm so glad you went there, Chris Whipple. When these polls come out, there's always conversation, indeed, on this program and on the stations I'm heard on across the country. There's always conversation about how bad his poll numbers are. And the point you've just made now is resonant, because if the country is as polarized as we all know it is, why then do we ever think that any president from this point out is going to have poll numbers above 50%, much less in the 60s and 70s? That may never happen again, given how polarized the nation is. But yet when these polls come out, I'm guilty of it, everybody jumps on these polls and says, oh my God, his poll numbers are so bad, when we know that the country is more divided than it ever has been. We're just that polarized. It's a powerful point that I've never heard anybody make to me.
Oh, well, I think it's true. I think, and it's not. And also, we should try to put it in a little bit of perspective, because if you rewind to where Ronald Reagan was at this point of his presidency, with a really severe recession.
Do we have to, Chris? Do we have to go back to the Reagan era? Do we have to? I digress. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just for a second.
Yeah.
Just for a second.
All right. Make it quick. Make it quick. Yeah.
Yeah. Reagan's approval rating was about the same as Biden's. It was high 30s.
Mm-hmm.
High 30s. And not too long thereafter, he had, Morning Again in America.
Yeah.
And a landslide in '84. So we've been there.
Yep. All right. That was quick. Thank God for Jesus. I didn't want to stay in that Reagan era for too long. When we come forward, there are a number of things I want to get to. Of course, we're going to get right into what Chris Whipple learned when he went inside Joe Biden's White House the last couple of years. But he said something a moment ago that made me think that I want to take his temperature on. When he mentioned a moment ago that we're going to see a lot more of Joe Biden out on the stump. Indeed, we will. That is dramatically different, if you recall, from what we saw the first time Joe Biden won. Joe Biden was campaigning during a pandemic, and the GOP made fun of him all the time. But Joe Biden basically campaigned for president from Wilmington, Delaware. That's where he won. But he basically campaigned from his campaign headquarters, essentially, in Wilmington. He didn't get out. He wasn't traveling the country. COVID didn't allow him to do so. Why do I raise that? Because he was able to safely campaign, and a lot of what we might have seen we didn't see because he wasn't out on the stump. What happens now when Joe Biden day in and day out is, in fact, out on the stump? Does that open up the door for more missteps and mistakes and miscues? We talked about that earlier, but in the context of his being out there more frequently, what might that mean for this contest that is in the offing? Chris Whipple is our guest. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
From Leimert Park with love, this is Tavis Smiley.
Escalade IQ. This the intro to the all-electric Cadillac perfection like zoom. And on a full charge, you get 450 miles without the stop haiku. This is what I do. Daddy fat in the lag since 92. Linked all the way back, panoramic roof. Come with 24-inch rim standard. Ooh, why? Shawty don't kill him. Cadillac diamond in the back, cold chillin'. And when I'm on attack, on the track is no ceiling. Sky's the limit. You hear me? You hear me? Straight drop, no parachutes. Lay lines like a longitude and latitude. Feel it, beloved, clearly, we're hustling. Bustin', truckin'. Cadillac, Cadillac, Cadillac.
For more on the Escalade IQ, visit Cadillac.com. Available late 2024. GM estimate 450-mile range. On a full charge based on development testing and/or analytical projection. Consistent with the CHA 1634 revision 2017 MCT. Range subject to change prior to production. Annual rates may vary based on service factors, including ambience temperature, terrain, battery age, and condition loading, and how you use and maintain your vehicle.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. Idalia has rapidly gained hurricane strength as it takes aim at Florida. The National Weather Service expects Idalia to make landfall tomorrow morning in the Gulf Coast of Florida, just north of Tampa, as a Category 3 hurricane with winds that could reach up to 120 miles an hour. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says the state will start seeing the impact from Idalia later today. In Michigan, a judge has removed the city of Grand Rapids from the civil lawsuit filed by the African-American family of Patrick Leonia, who was shot and killed last year by a former city police officer. Judge Paul Maloney ruled that the family did not provide the facts to demonstrate a link between the allegations of racial discrimination, proper training for officers, and the actions by former officer Christopher Schur. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
See the slow drive through South LA. It's going to be busy as you travel Burbank, and looks like Inglewood trying to clear a stalled vehicle on the 405 north at Florence, Manchester. That is in the right lane. The busy drive just as you approach that 105. Industry, it's going to be a wreck affecting the carpool lane on the 60 West at Azusa Avenue. Carpool lane blocks the crash. Stay over to the right there. See a busy commute as you travel in Burbank. This is going to be on our 134 eastbound at Pass Avenue. Second lane from the left blocked with a collision. And looks like South LA on the 110 south at Century Boulevard. A crash in the express lane slowing the drive here from MLK Jr. Boulevard.
Need an accident attorney by your side? All you got to do is call the accident guys.
Injured in a car accident or at work? Call the accident guys to speak with a real expert attorney for a free consultation.
Right now, during Labor Day savings at Lowe's, get up to $1,500 off select major kitchen appliances. Lowe's knows home improvement. Valid through 8/30. Savings vary based on purchase amount. Exclusions apply. See Lowe's.com for details.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
I'm a bad man.
LeBron's son Bronny is attending classes this week at USC. No word yet on when he'll be cleared to resume basketball activities. Bronny suffered a cardiac arrest on July 24th during a workout on the USC campus. Bronny was diagnosed with a congenital heart defect. The U.S. Open tennis tournament kicked off Monday in New York City. Coco Gauff defeated Laura Siegemund of Germany in 3 sets. Gauff will play Myra Andreeva of Russia in the second round Wednesday night. Michelle Obama was a surprise guest speaker last night when the U.S. Open celebrated 50 years of equal pay for men and women in professional tennis. Today is final cut day for the NFL's 32 teams. Each team must reach the 53-man roster limit by 1 p.m. today. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be ready for extreme heat in your area. On days when extreme heat is expected, take action to keep your home as cool as possible. Set your air conditioner to 78 degrees. If AC isn't available, close blinds and curtains on all windows and run fans counterclockwise. Or find your nearest cooling center. Transportation help may be available. Learn more at heatreadyca.com. Brought to you by the state of California.
Gotta stay fresh, ma. Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Are you looking for a tax preparation firm that understands the unique financial challenges of African American business owners? Then look no more. Wealth Management Financial Advisors can prepare and file your individual and business taxes. They're committed to providing their clients with the best possible service. See how they make the greatest impact on your taxes. Find them at wealthmanagementlb.com or call them at 562-427-8877. That's 562-427-8877.
Let's get back to more of Tavis Smiley right now.
Let's get back to more of Chris Whipple right now on Tavis Smiley, a New York Times bestselling author, political analyst, Emmy award-winning filmmaker, and author of the book, The Fight of His Life, Inside Joe Biden's White House. Chris, good to have you on in this hour. Let me jump right back to what I teed up a moment ago, and that is, and it occurred to me again while you were talking, and you used that phrase, we're going to see him, Joe Biden, that is, a lot more out on the stump. We didn't see him on the stump 4 years ago. And we didn't see him on the stump. He was on his rump. He was on his rump in Wilmington, Delaware. He was not out on the stump.
In the basement. Right?
Yeah, in the basement, yeah. So that raises the question whether or not once he gets out on the stump, we'll see him fall on his rump. You tell me what you expect when we see this guy out campaigning like we did not 4 years ago. Again, so much of what we're dealing with is rare. We've never been in space like this. He did not have to get out and campaign 4 years ago and couldn't because of the pandemic. But now we expect this guy to be out there every day moving around the country, and that seems to open him up to some missteps, some miscues, the kind of stuff that you said earlier in some respect is much ado about nothing, but you conceded that if we catch him in the wrong moment, that could be decisive.
Yeah, well, first, apologies for talking over you as you were trying to
No, not a problem.
Back then. But sounds to me, Tavis, like you want to send him back to the basement.
It's safer. It's safer, man. It's safer.
You're worried about old Joe stepping on another sandbag. Look, I think that there's not too much to worry about there because his campaign team is going to be very strategic about all of this. And back in November of 2022, again, when he had that great better than expected performance the Democrats did in the 2022 midterms, Biden was basically what happened was his team sat him down. Biden wanted to go everywhere and talk about everything. He wanted to brag about all the stuff he'd done. And they sat him down and they said, Mr. President, look, you're going to go to the following states where we think you're going to make the biggest difference, and you're going to talk about women's reproductive rights and the threat of MAGA to democracy. Mm-hmm. Well, the rest is history. He followed that script. I think they will do the same thing on this go-around, and I think Biden will listen. He's going to go only where they tell him to go, where he thinks he can, the states where he thinks he can make a positive difference. And I think you'll see him pretty focused, and they'll try to keep sandbags away from him.
Yeah. This question may be way too soon, and for that matter, it may change dramatically. I suspect it will between now and then, but let me ask anyway, at this point in the process, whether or not we already know, whether or not the Biden campaign already knows the battlegrounds where they're going to have to get it on this year, and whether or not, because of what's happened over the last 4 years, those battlegrounds are different now than they were then. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and man, it may be a little bit over my pay grade because I'm not inside the Biden reelection campaign or seeing those numbers at this point, but I think some of the states are pretty obvious. I think Georgia and Wisconsin and Illinois, and but beyond that, I don't want to speculate about exactly where they'll be going.
Yep. So let me get straight away. We've been talking about all the issues that you cover in your text, but let me go straight away into the book. The book is called "The Fight of His Life: Inside Joe Biden's White House." Our guest Chris Whipple is the author of that fine book. So when one goes inside the Biden White House, what does one see? You mentioned earlier you saw warts and all. I could start by asking, what warts did you see? But I'll let you take it. I'll let you take it as you want to take it. When you go inside the Biden White House, what do you see?
Well, I'll tell you this: you see a lot more drama behind the scenes than you might guess looking in from the outside. But having said that, my first two books about the White House chiefs of staff and the CIA directors covered something like 100 years of history cumulatively. This book, The Fight of His Life, covers 2 years, the first 2 years of the Biden White House, and yet it was a bigger challenge, more difficult. And that's partly because you're writing about a White House in mid-flight. It's like trying to design an airplane in mid-flight. You don't know where it's going to land. But compounding that, this is one of the most battened down, disciplined, organized White Houses in recent memory. And despite that, I was able to get a lot of his inner circle. I was able to knock him off script and get some pretty candid talk about the drama behind that debacle of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and Biden's true feelings about his Secret Service detail and about Kamala Harris and a lot of other stuff. So there's a lot of good inside stuff despite that.
Yep. I'd almost forgotten about it until you said it. So much was made of the fact that Joe Biden would in fact pay a price for that Afghanistan debacle. That withdrawal was just a hot mess, as we all know. And until you said it, we'd forgotten about it. Ukraine, at least on the international front, has taken the place of that particular debacle. And although many of us have concerns about this blank check that we seem to be giving Ukraine, he has successfully, to your point, rallied NATO to Ukraine's defense. And I think that the conversation we had a while ago about his paying a price for the debacle in Afghanistan is old news at this point. I don't think anybody even remembers that at this point.
Yeah, maybe not, but it's part of the story of this White House. And I really see the Biden presidency and my book as a kind of political thriller in 3 acts. The first act was the unbelievably fraught transition, the final days from Trump to Biden. And I tell the previously untold story of how one of Trump's deputy chiefs, unbeknownst to Trump and right under his nose, helped the Biden team carry out the peaceful transition of power despite Trump's opposition. Then there came the first year of the Biden White House, which was dominated by Afghanistan and Biden's inability to pass major legislation. You remember Build Back Better and bipartisan infrastructure were going nowhere for a long time. We forget that at that point in his presidency, about 9 months in, there was, people were wondering, will this be a failed presidency? And then came the third act on February 24, 2022, when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and Biden rose to meet that moment. I don't think anybody else could have as well as he did. I think that where everything went wrong with Afghanistan, almost everything went right with Ukraine. Nobody believed it was happening, but Biden told them it was and rallied the NATO allies. And now, of course, then that was followed by a tremendous record of legislative success. So now we look at Act 4, which is this rough and really challenging re-election campaign, and that's the next act, and there's no ending yet.
Yeah. I've been inside enough White House administrations in my career to know that even when you're on the team, as to say, when you're running as a team, Biden-Harris, once inside the White House, there is still the Biden team and there is the Harris team. That's true for any administration. So let me ask you well, I'm looking at my clock here. Let me tee this up and we'll get your response on the other side. I don't want to let you get into this and have to cut you off. Again, they run as a team, but once they're in the White House, there's still two different teams. There's the Biden team and there's the Harris team. They don't always get along. I want to ask Chris Whipple, and I will when we come forward, what he heard from the Biden people about Kamala Harris and whether or not he thinks what he heard on or off the record come out of their mouths about Kamala Harris was in fact the truth, the way they really feel. We'll talk about that when we come forward. The author of The Fight of His Life, Inside Joe Biden's White House, Chris Whipple, who you're listening to right now on Tavis Smiley.
Unapologetically progressive. Unapologetically black. You're tapped into Tavis Smiley.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
When you're young, life is full of choices. Don't let opioids like highly addictive and deadly fentanyl take away your life with just one wrong pill. Addiction is a disease that can affect anyone at any age. But there is a choice to get help for this disease. Find medically proven treatment options, including virtual, at choosemat.org.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Maisha Cairo here for KBLA Talk 1580. We're live in Los Angeles at JP Morgan Chase's Advancing Black Wealth Tour. And I'm speaking to some of the attendees today to see why it was so important for them to be here.
Yeah, this is Lathan and Tyler. Main reason that's very important for me to be here is just to leave a legacy for my kids. Black wealth, generational wealth is what we need in our community, you know. Oh, Chase, someone has to take the lead. They're showing, big business like Chase cares, and they're putting their money where their mouth is at. So it's good to see, big institution like Chase, giving a lifting hand, to the community, and you got to respect that. It makes me want to bank with Chase, and give them another look. If I go to another institution, I actually see what Chase is doing for the community.
That's right, Chase is doing their part to help advance Black wealth. For more money support, tune in every day from 12 to 2 to KBLA Talk 1580's Midday Money Chain, right here.
You're listening to K-Drip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like Sprinklers in the Rain and Leaky Faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on.
K-Drip. He's rooting for everybody black. Everybody black. More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
All right, Chris Whipple, keep it real. What did the Biden folk tell you about Kamala Harris, and do you believe what you heard?
So, Tavis, you know that I wrote about this at some length in my book, The Fight of His Life, and it's a fascinating, complicated relationship between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And in the beginning, I'll tell you what everybody was telling me, that Joe Biden really likes Kamala Harris, that they had and values her. They had a strong relationship. They were thrown together in the beginning in part by COVID. She wasn't traveling because of COVID, and neither was he, and they were together. And every time she wasn't at a meeting, Biden would look around and say, "Where is she?" And he'd want her there. We've all seen her perform as senator in those hearings when she's grilling witnesses, and so she's good at that, and he valued her input. Then things got a little bit rocky as time went on, and she struggled particularly with the portfolio of the Northern Triangle, the border, and she had that awkward interview with Lester Holt, you remember?
Yep.
All that stuff. And she began to get flack, and word got back to Joe Biden that not only was Kamala complaining about how difficult her assignments were, but the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, was talking about it around town, and this got back to Biden, and it pissed him off. And Biden was asked by a close friend, how's Kamala doing? And he said, a work in progress. So that some of his frustration was showing there, and But having said that, I think that, so I'll tell you what I heard a lot from Ron Klain, the White House chief of staff at the time.
Right.
Remember, keep in mind that he served as chief of staff to Joe Biden when Joe Biden was vice president. So he knows the deal. And he knows it's a really, really tough job being VP. So Klain would go into the vice president's office once a week and tell her, you know what? You can't score runs from the dugout, as he put it. You got to get out there, and you got to be more, raise your profile. We want you out there. And she was reluctant to do it, maybe because she felt burned by that experience with Lester Holt. Who knows? But she was a reluctant warrior, and I think now, more recently, I think she's gained more confidence, and she's out there talking especially about women's reproductive rights, and I think she's being more assertive. So, but it's a fascinating relationship, and there's been an evolution to it, which I write about in the book.
Two things right quick, watching my time here. One, there are those who believe that she was given a difficult portfolio for a particular reason. You believe that?
Well, no doubt that she got a difficult portfolio. I don't know that it was for any particular reason. I mean, it's pretty similar to the portfolio that Joe Biden had, that Obama gave him.
Yeah.
So,
Joe Biden had a lot
Yeah.
more experience than Kamala Harris did, though.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So no, he gave her tough assignments, and in national security, she made a real contribution.
Yeah.
I tell the story in the book just very quickly about how she confronted Volodymyr Zelensky on the eve of the invasion and said, "Hey, listen, they're coming not just for Ukraine, but for you and your family."
Yeah.
And she had this private meeting that nobody'd written about.
Yeah. Finally, on this issue, and we'll wrap our conversation when we come forward. Word on the street is that Jill Biden still ain't feeling Kamala. She's never forgiven her for coming after Joe in that debate. So she was on the team. She was the pick to be the running mate for all the obvious reasons, but that Jill Biden wasn't and still is not feeling Kamala Harris. Anything on that?
I would say in the beginning that was a problem. There, Jill Biden is, as you can imagine, fiercely loyal to Joe, and that whole family, I think, was not crazy about that debate performance. I think Jill, my personal feeling is, from what I hear, she got over it.
Okay.
Jill Biden's fine with her now.
Fair enough. When we come forward, our remaining moments with Chris Whipple, we'll talk about the R word, race, and his read on how Joe Biden has done on that particular issue. There are any number of ways to read what he has and has not accomplished on the race front. Never mind the fact that he wouldn't be there were it not for black voters, black women in particular. How has Joe Biden done on the race issue? We'll talk about that with Chris Whipple when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
This is getting good.
Yeah, man.
Tavis Smiley continues when we come forward.
What's up, party people? It's your favorite MC's favorite rapper, MC Light here. And we're celebrating 50 years of hip-hop, authentically powered by Cadillac. And we're going to take it way back to where it started. It was only fitting that hip-hop began with teenagers at a back-to-school jam in the rec room of a South Bronx apartment complex by an 18-year-old brother. By the way, I'm also sure he had a Cadillac parked outside. He noticed the energy on the dance floor when he switched between two turntables, extending the beats, repeating the breaks, and never losing the rhythms. And that was the birth of hip-hop. And from that moment, it took off.
For more on how Cadillac is celebrating hip-hop's 50th, visit Cadillac.com/audacity.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. South Central Youth Empowered Through Action is the youth component of the impactful CBO, known as the Community Coalition. South Central Youth Empowered Through Action has chapters at almost every South LA high school. Say Yeah, as they are popularly known, is located at 80th and Vermont, but serves young people all over South LA. Under the COCO umbrella, they train youth organizers, help underserved scholars prepare for college, and work with students to help them gain admission to top universities. South Central Youth Empowered Through Action fosters teen activism, where young people have led campaigns moving tens of millions of dollars to South LA schools and forcing officials to make AP classes available to students in under-resourced institutions. SCEL scholars have taken part in the March on Washington, been published in major news outlets, and been elected to city council. Long before she was mayor, Karen Bass started the program when she founded the Community Coalition. To donate, volunteer, or enroll a student in South Central Youth Empowered Through Action, please visit cocsouthla.org. cocsouthla.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
If this were a Reese's TV ad, you'd be staring at a Reese's peanut butter cup. And sure, my voice is peanut buttery smooth, but still, you need to see the peanut butter cups, right? No? I can really just say Reese's and you'll go get some? Okay, Reese's. 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 Really working, actually. Reese's. Reese's. I'm on to something. Reese's. Reese's. Reese's.
More honesty than you can handle.
More empowerment than you can imagine.
You're tuned in to Tavis Smiley.
Got a few minutes left in this hour, Chris Whipple, before I lose you at the top of the hour. Let me close, I think, by getting your read on race. You established earlier in this conversation, as if black folk don't already know this, that Joe Biden's not president if it's not for the black vote, particularly in South Carolina and especially with African-American women. I could point to any number of things that he has done symbolically that would make you feel good if you're black. You mentioned KBJ on the Supreme Court. I could do a long list of other things, including, of course, his running mate, Kamala Harris. So symbolically, I think there's no debate about how he has done on the issue of race in this country, the issue that I think is the most intractable issue that we face, although there are others on that list. It may be at the top of the list, particularly given this shooting that we saw in Jacksonville, Florida, days ago. It is clear to me that 60 years after the March on Washington, black folk are still the most hated folk in this country. Beyond the symbolism, how has Joe Biden done substantively on race issues?
Well, substantively, I guess I would point to 13 million jobs created in the first 4 years, which is a record. As you know, his predecessor lost more jobs than any president in U.S. history. Biden's created more. Historically low unemployment rate and black unemployment rate. I can tell you that in every conversation I had with early on and during his first term, when people were talking about COVID, the COVID response, the word equity would come up all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were constantly talking about marginalized communities, largely African American communities. It was very much a priority for this White House, I think. And his key, some of his key advisors were, Cedric Richmond and Susan Rice and Jim Clyburn. I think they had his ear constantly and still do. So seems to me the really heavy lift for Biden was voting rights. He couldn't get it done with the filibuster. He couldn't. But I guess my closing point on this would just be that never forget that, I take him at his word, Charlottesville was the trigger that got Joe Biden to run for president. The reason he wanted to be president, I believe that. The forces that Charlottesville represented are still on the march. They're very much on the march in 2024. Don't forget that his opponent is the guy who said there were very fine people on both sides. And Biden, I think, is the guy who wants to make sure that they don't prevail.
Yep. I think that if he does not find a way in this next term, assuming he gets a second one, to get voting rights across the aisle, his presidency is going to be tainted with black people. And I think that means he's going to have to rethink this filibuster, these carve-outs, specifically on voting rights and maybe even on the George Floyd Policing Act or the John Lewis version of it. I think on those two issues, on police reform and on voting rights, if he does not figure out a way to get that across the finish line, his record will be forever tainted when it comes to what black folk actually achieved for putting him in. So that's my take, and I digress. His name is Chris Whipple. The text is called "The Fight of His Life" inside Joe Biden's White House. Chris, good to have you on. All the best to you, my friend. Thanks for your time.
Tavis, real pleasure to be on with you. Thank you.
A great honor to have you on. When we come forward, we'll talk to Connie Rice about this Jacksonville, Florida shooting, gunning down more black folk in this country, and some Trump stuff that we have to get into whether we want to or not. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. A dog later today. In Michigan, a judge has removed the city of Grand Rapids from the civil lawsuit filed by the